In order to get the highest quality 3D graphics out of your Cinema 4D layers in After Effects, you'll probably want to utilize the multipass workflow. And if you're unfamiliar with the term multipass, let me go ahead and create some multipass layers so we can talk about how those layers function to give us an added level of control over the appearance of our 3D object. Let's select layer 1, and then with layer 1 selected, let's go to our effects control panel. In there we have our Cineware options, and if you scroll down towards the bottom, we have multipass linear workflow. Go down to the Add Image Layers button and press it. Now we've automatically added a bunch of layers of multipass renders. The object that was rendered out of Cinema was originally being displayed as one individual layer. But the way After Effects works, you can blend multiple layers together to get a high quality image. Well, if I make the size of my timeline a little bit larger, just so you can see all the different multipass layers, you can also notice that we have different blend modes applied to those layers. So it's a mixture of all these layers that actually make up the quality of this model. Having the ability to access each one of these individual layers gives me the ability to apply just slight tweaks and changes. For example, if we go to the specular layer, I could go ahead and solo that layer so you can see exactly how it's affecting the image. So let's turn the specular layer solo off and press T to open its opacity, and let's just click and drag to change how it blends into our 3D model. And notice as I drag it down to around, now our model is significantly less bright. If we crank that up to 100%, now it's kind of popping off the screen. If I wanted to have even more control, I could just select this layer and press Command D to duplicate, and then I'd have an even brighter scene. You get the idea. Once you have a multipass layer created, you have the utmost control over the individual aspects that make up that model. Now most of the time when I'm working, I don't want to automatically create all of these different layers. I just want to be able to specify the individual layers that I'd like to be able to work with. So to do that, we actually need to go over into Cinema. But when we're in Cinema, we're also going to look at some of the other render options to make sure that we're going to have the highest quality models coming out of our Cinema 4D project. So before we jump over to Cinema, I'm going to collapse layer 11 and click on layer 12 and shift click on layer 1 to select them all, and we'll just delete all these extra layers. Let's make sure to turn visibility of our multipass C4D layer back on. Now let's select layer 1 and press Command E on the Mac or Control E on Windows to edit the original file. Once you're in Cinema, go to the button that has the clapboard with the cog on it. That's our render settings button. We'll go ahead and open our render settings, and I want you to jump down to anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing selected, let's change the aliasing from geometry to best. This will ensure that the model renders at beautifully high quality. Now the filter option allows me to render for still images and animation. So let's click on that and choose Gauss animation. Now that we have our anti-aliasing settings set up, let's go ahead and click on multipass. Notice in the multipass section we don't have anything loaded yet, so let's go down here to the multipass button. If you click on the button, you can see all these different multipass layers like we just created in After Effects. Now I just want to access a few of these areas. Let's start by adding a material color pass, and then we can click on multipass again, and this time we'll choose specular, and then we'll add one more thing. Click on multipass, and this time choose object buffer. Now the object buffer is specified as buffer number 1. Now we haven't added an object buffer yet, but we'll do that after we close our render settings. Now we want to make sure to enable multipass, so go ahead and check that box. Now we've specified the individual passes that we'd like to render out of our Cinema project. Let's go ahead and close our render settings. Now we need to specify that object buffer, so go over to your H+ logo and select it. If you go to the tag section, you can go to Cinema 4D tags. Then under here we have a compositing tag. If we select that, there's a channel called object buffer. When we're in the object buffer channel, go ahead and click enable. The buffer is set to number 1. It's important that this number match the object buffer number that we set up in our render settings. Now we're actually ready to save this, so we can go back into our Cinema project. So I'm going to go up into the File menu and choose Save. Now I'm going to jump into After Effects. Make sure to wait for a second, and then After Effects should reload with all the new changes. Go ahead and select layer 1. With layer 1 selected, now you'll notice Defined Multipasses is able to be selected. Let's go ahead and select that. Now when we click Add Image Layers, it's only going to add the 3 different channels that we specified. Now notice it automatically turned off my main background layer, so let's just turn that back on. Now things still don't look quite right. Anytime you realize you're in this situation, that's when you utilize the Solo button. So let's select our object buffer layer and go ahead and click the Solo button. Here you can see I've got a luminescence render of my object, and that's how the object buffer works. It gives you the alpha channel of whatever your 3D graphic is. We'll use this in a second. For now we want to drag it to the top of the layer hierarchy and just disable it. So let's turn off Solo and turn off the visibility for a multi-pass object buffer. Now we have our specular layer that's on top, and I know that's fine, and then our next layer is this material color. I have a feeling when we turn this off everything is going to look okay, and sure enough it is. The material color pass is designed for us to actually change the color of our graphic, and in order for it to function properly we have to change the blend mode. So first let's turn on the visibility for layer 3 and then go up under the effect options. In here I want you to go to color correction, and then we can choose color balance, hue level, saturation. Now that we've applied this effect, it's giving me a warning, just letting me know that hey, this isn't a 32-bit effect. But honestly that's okay. The way that we're going to blend this, it'll work. Now if we go to our modes panel, let's change the blend mode from normal to color. Now once we've changed it to color, notice our logo has popped back into the scene, but let's change the color. I'm going to click and drag on the hue value and it's going to crank around the hue. But since I don't have any saturation in my original render, I'm going to go ahead and just increase the saturation. Because it's there, it's just very subtle, so now we've made our logo kind of red. I'm going to keep clicking and dragging around until I get something that's a little more purple. There we go. We'll set it for a value of 92. Now since I have this material color layer as its own individual layer, I can press T to adjust the opacity. Let's click and drag the opacity down just to blend the purple in a little more subtly. Now just like in our earlier example, we could duplicate the specular channel or adjust its opacity. For now I actually think this looks perfect. Let's look at the alpha channel for our graphic though. If we click on the channel pull down, we can switch it to alpha and notice we don't have any transparency in the background. Well, that's why I rendered the object buffer. So let's turn our RGB channels back on and enable the object buffer. Now when you see it, it's just going to blow everything out. But if we change the blend mode, we can switch it from normal to stencil luma. What this will do is create a stencil based on the luminance value. So we can go ahead and enable that, and sure enough, we've got our logo back in the scene. And yes, if we go ahead and check out our alpha, we have our full alpha channel. So I'll just enable RGB again, and as you can see, when you have multipass rendering enabled inside Cinema, you can really step up the quality of your renders.